ways, and it does serve a very positive function here. Folk literature helps us to preserve, preserve our literature, preserve our culture, preserve our language, preserve our stories, the local stories, which are left untold in the mainstream literature. It also helps us to form a bond, a community bond, which takes us farther in the memory lane when we sit down to recollect our past, our history. And it also helps us to represent and express. A good example could be a popular folk theatre such as Tamasha, which helps us to express and represent. Representation also happens on the level of tribal literature, where tribal literature gets a full-fledged space in the form of folk literature to express and voice itself. So, like I started my talk, in the domain of popular literature, now that we are aiming towards or we are hurrying towards the terrain of popular literature, popular culture, and now with the coming of new literature in the form of slam poetry being introduced in a classroom study or graffiti getting introduced in a classroom study, it is important to go back to the roots and make closer reading of folk literature. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Aligarh, for your thoughtful discussion. Indeed, it's time to preserve our folk culture because we are going to, every day we're somehow हम लोग खो रहे हैं. So it's really we need to think and rethink about how to preserve our culture. आप डॉक्टर जावेद आलम सर को बुलाने से पहले मैं जो आज की जो पेपर रीडर्स हैं अपरा शनेरिया एंड दादर मैं उन लोगों को बुलाना चाहूंगी क्योंकि वो लोग बाहर से आए हैं सर और वो लोगों को जाने की भी थोड़ा सा जल्दी भी है. तो मैं आज की जो पहला पेपर रीडर की तरफ अपरा शनेरिया प्लीज कम हियर एंड प्लीज.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Apra Sabria, and I'm a research scholar from the University of Aligarh. I really need to thank AMU, especially the Marathi section of the Department of Modern Indian Languages, for such a warm welcome. I was not expecting to get considered today, but thank you so much. And I also want to say good afternoon to all the esteemed dignitaries over here, and all my fellow researchers and other popular enthusiasts. So today I'm presenting a paper on the topic of exploring the role of women in Bodo folk literature from a socio-cultural perspective. So I need to establish Bodo is a tribe and it is an indigenous community from Assam spread through the northwestern region. Bodo folk literature is infused with vitality, protest, and an unrelenting character, and it still informs the everyday lives of people. For the purpose of this study, the themes of resilience and resistance will be explored pertaining to women. This paper demonstrates that women in Bodo folk literature function under cultural constraints and exhibit subtle acts of rebellion encoded in narrative tradition. So when I say encoded, I will back it with some theoretical rendering to it, but we'll come on to that later. These symbolic narratives about women are about confronting the social norms. This study will help in shedding light on how women have navigated domestic, societal, and historical repression in the face of patriarchy and how oral narratives provide a space for reclaiming agency and subverting the order. This study posits itself as an attempt to amplify the voices from the periphery to be brought to the center of the larger pan-Indian discourse. The struggle for assertion and identity and expression by women has brought to the forefront the concerns of multifaceted marginalization and subalternity within Bodo folklore, thereby challenging its interpretations even further. An analysis is thus offered of Bodo folk literature as a medium of indigenous wisdom sustained through oral tradition and cultural continuity. Bodo community is an indigenous group which exists in the northwestern region of Assam. Bodos belong from a Sino-Tibetan family who possess a rich stock of oral literature. Oral literature, by nature of its propagation, has deep roots in informing the socio-cultural perspective. Bodo folk literature is just not the relic of a past, but is a dynamic entity facilitating the community to navigate the cultural milieu even today. Um, the This paper focuses basically on the myths within Bodo folk literature, and I'll be dealing with two myths, and these are two creation myths within Bodos, which are revered by Bodos, but we'll be dealing with an alternative interpretation of them when we render feminist folklore theory through it. Um, so this paper aims to challenge the traditional interpretation of these myths, which prioritize cosmic or agrarian aspects over the gender power struggle, and that is through resistance and repression of women. It is crucial to look at myriad interpretations of the body of folk literature as it aids the evolutionary development of meaning-making process. The academic inquiry into women possessing and reclaiming the space after constant roadblocks and redefining the field of folklore needs to be explored today. Um, the methodology involved, I'll talk a little about this. The primary objective of this paper is to understand the resistance and repression of women. And the two myths that I have selected are the myths of duodenum and the myth of Brahmoni. Um, I will give a short, brief retelling of these narratives just a little later. This methodology adopts a comprehensive approach to the narratives, which help in the nuanced exploration of these myths. The study integrates articles taken from the public domain, stories, myths, legends, and among other sources to shape its comprehensive folkloric research. Central to the demand of this paper is the feminist folklore theory, which essentially shifts the traditional approach of these myths into the alternative way of interpreting these myths. So, considering that the popular conception of these myths revered in world tradition. These are creation myths. But this paper aims to highlight the subversion of that very way of conception of these myths. Um, this paper posits women under patriarchal restrictions to come up with coded forms of self-expression in order to subvert the order or to reclaim their autonomy. Uh, so, feminist folklore theory examines how gender and power dynamics are expressed through traditional culture. It considers gender at the center of cultural analysis. It does not look at only women's stories, but also explore how folklore transgresses or subverts social expectations on the grounds of gender. Um, the theory suggests that marginalized groups like women, who often exist under patriarchal resistance, develop the codes for the said subversion. The feminist folklore theory is an ever-evolving and a dynamic space which has essentially evolved into an intersectional analysis of any folklore. So now I'll just give a brief description of the myths that I'm going to be dealing with. The first is the myth of duodenum. Now this is a myth that is behind Hirai Puja, and Hirai Puja happens to be the most important puja in Bodo culture, whereby they perform it when it is the time of harvest, and they invoke Bathu bride. Now Bathu bride is the supreme creator god within Bodo culture. So, so the myth behind this is that there used to be an old man who is called Jara in Bodo. Jara is the old man. He used to have 5 sons, and the wife of the youngest son, whose name was Monli. Now, Monli is our title character, is our protagonist here in the story. So Monli happens to be the youngest daughter-in-law of this old man, and she uh, gets relentlessly pursued by her father-in-law and relentlessly pursued romantically and sexually. So he never leaves a chance to get on her inappropriately. So because of these actions, Monli flees. She runs away, and this Jara, this old man, tries to find her everywhere. And in order to find her, he is never able to find her only when he performs a Khelai puja, only when he appeases Bathu bride, he he is able to find Monli, but Monli does not come in her in a form of the submissive daughter-in-law that she used to be. She now becomes now she comes back in form of a shamanic dancer who is adored in Batu culture. So now this dancer is possessed by the gods, especially possessed by the spirit of Batu Bride himself. So finally he finds Roland, an old man. But in the theory of feminist coding given by Joan Newland Radner and Susan S. Lancer from the essay The Feminist Voice Strategies of Coding in Folklore and Literature, um, they, uh, the feminist coding can be employed here. So the father-in-law goes mad while the victim only becomes a code, a medium of the divine. This establishes an inversion of power, which depicts that masculine madness was a moral failure of the father-in-law self-control. Though Herai Puja is widely considered as an origin myth and it's widely revered, and it's still done today during the time of harvest. But it still centers on the escape of a woman from domestic abuse, of domestic violence. So, in this sense, Radner and Lancer have said in their, and I quote them when they say, the perception of coding and the construction of the decoded text depends on the conviction that coded indeed has taken place. In that light, when only comes back in form of coding, Bodhini is possessed by the spirit, and it is and the tool of shamanism is used to escape violence. When Moni returns as Rodini, she can no longer be subject to social norms. She can act outside of them and command the attention of the community. In this case, her resistance could be realized through the expression, um, can be realized only through when it was expressed as divine. So the need to be divine here is the consequence of her dehumanization. Even though her level was exalted to the level of spirits and gods, still it was an act of dehumanization. Another myth, I'll keep it really short. It is the myth of the first man and the first woman and their symbolic marriage in Bodo culture. So, the first man and the first woman here happened to be twins. They were brother and sisters. Ravana was the brother, and Ravni was the sister. As they grow older, the brother gets infatuated by his twin sister, and the grandmother announces their marriage. To this, Ravni actually flees into the sky, and then she lets out bitter abuses onto the own brother. And then, okay, and,
बोला ना सर
okay, I'll leave it. So when Ravni flees into the sky, she exposes her back to her own brother and she curses him in the name of their mother. And that becomes, and to this, the brother lets out a bitter cry in agony, in emotional agony. And that bitter cry becomes the thunder and her acting of her, that act of her showing her back to her brother and letting her abuses to him becomes the lightning. So this is also closely folk literature really comes close to scatological references too. So sorry for that. But in here we see that Rowney becomes a natural phenomenon instead of just a spirit spouse. And she's also can be seen as a survivor of incestuous attempt. And in conclusion, I just want to say that the women's scurrying off to become divine creatures happens due to in order to reclaim their own agency, and it is used as a motive in repetitively in Bodo myths. It is deeply ingrained into the dense cultural fabric of the community, and portrayals of resistance by women are respected, even though they might not be outwardly celebrated. The portraiture of women, figure of women is contrasted by the fact, on one hand, that they are innocent damsels just going on about their lives. but the threat of the assault on them, then they can become a formidable force that changes the course of nature itself. Um, so the representation of women in Bodo folk literature is obviously germinated with the undercurrents of
Thank you, Agura. It was really nice paper. And yeah, there is, every folk tales has a it's a huge story behind every tale. So it's very. To conclude. Then the next paper reader is Didi Priyaraj. Please come here and present your paper. आवाज नहीं पीडीएफ पेंसिल
So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Priya Das from Mahatma Jyotiba Phule Rohilkhand University, Delhi. And the title of the paper that I am going to read today is Gender-Based Criminality and Ecofeminist Resistance, Decolonizing Folklore and Feminine Monstrosity in Anvita Folk Horror. So, myths and folktales have always been the integral parts of ancient Indian culture, and mediums of digital storytelling have played significant role in reviving them in different interactive platforms, generating renewed attention among larger audience on regional issues that are usually overshadowed by the overarching supremacy of mainstream cinema. One among such indigenous issues that still confirm its thriving existence in contemporary India is the malicious practice of witch hunting, a primitive superstitious activity grounded on the folklore of Chudel, or in local language, witch. According to the local belief, Chudel is the wandering spirit of a malicious woman killing people to seek revenge for her untimely death. And according to the NCRB reports of 2022, over the past decade, from 2012 to 2022, over 1,500 women have been lost their lives on being allegedly suspected as witches. Now, if I briefly talk about the history of witch hunting in India, you can find that with the legal abolition of the practice of witch hunting by the British official in the year 1857 as a part of their colonial civilizing mission, there had been a huge increase in the cases of witch hunting in several parts of India, which was not only a form of anti-colonial protest against the forceful cultural invasion, but also a warning to all the non-conforming women seeking autonomy under the influence of Western liberal ideals. As a result, indigenous women, who were the primary targets of the colonizers to justify their colonial civilizing goals, became the victims of double colonization, both in the hands of the colonizers, who, in the name of social reformation, tactfully utilized them as a tool to legitimize their control upon the colony, and the native people, who, under the garb of anti-colonial mission, continued superstition-based crimes upon them to prevail their patriarchal supremacy in the society. With this concern, please come to the objectives, slide of objectives. First slide. Yes. With this concern, this paper examines the 2020 Netflix original movie Bulbul, and the objectives are to provide a counter argument to the indigenous concept of witch hunting through portraying the central character Bulbul, to explore the decolonization and reinterpretation of the conventional discourse of today prevalent in indigenous folktales, to highlight the redefined idea of monstrous femininity, to find out the underlying hypocrisies of patriarchal society in perpetuating the superstitious practice of witch making, and finally, to examine the cinematic representation of Bulbul as an agent of feminist resistance. Next slide. Next. Come to the discussion.
Now let us come to the discussion part of the paper. That in a Brahmin zamindari household of 17th century Bengal, Bulbul exclusively deals with the indigenous folktale of children and examines the brutal superstitious activity performed surrounding it to exploit and subjugate women. From the very title of the movie, it becomes evident that the entire story revolves around the central character Bulbul and her transformative journey from an innocent young child to an authoritative, vengeful lady that makes her the target of witch hunting. At the beginning, Bulbul is introduced as a playful child sitting casually on the branches of mango tree, hanging her bare feet, wearing a disheveled bridal attire on her wedding day. Such state of aloofness from home and enjoyment amidst the wilderness not only establishes the mutual interconnection between Bulbul and nature, but also clearly reflects her free-spirited personality. Along with that, her untidy physical appearance, close shots of her decorated feet, and her habit of climbing trees bear an eerie resemblance with that of a witch that also has twisted feet and resides inside the jungle away from human territory. In the next scene, we find the child bride Bulbul is married to Indranil Thakur, the eldest son of a wealthy Zamindar family, and feeling completely unaccustomed to the rigid customs and oppressive environment of the royal haveni, spends most of the time playing with her brother-in-law Satya Thakur, the youngest brother of Indranil, that becomes the reason of a series of misfortunes. Soon she becomes the victim of crude family conspiracy. Vinodini, the wife of Indranil's insane brother Mahendra, who secretly envies Bulbul for her social status as the badi bahu of the Haveli, continuously instigates Indranil against the budding relationship between Bulbul and Satya that fears fatal consequences. Out of suspicion, Indranil immediately decides to send Satya to London and discovers the destroyed pages of an incomplete story that Bulbul and Satya had been writing together. Such a revelation leaves Indranil devastated and resolves to kill Satya immediately after discovering the truth. And he almost smashes her legs by repeatedly hitting them with hot iron rod until they are totally disfigured. But the level of atrocities reaches its extremity when the mentally unstable Mahendra also does not spare Bulbul from punishment and brutally rapes her, taking the advantage of her wretched condition. Such abominable instances of patriarchal perversion not only cause her physical disfigurement or robs her out of her innocence, but also mold her into a completely different persona who is more apathetic, mystical, and indifferent to others' comment, which reflects her assertive and emancipated soul. This drastic shift in Bulbul's demeanor is unapproved by the stakeholders of patriarchy, and she is abandoned by all her family members, just like a witch who is castigated from human company. But in this state of dejection, nature becomes her safe haven and continuously assists her in taking revenge of the atrocities inflicted upon her, as well as upon all the subjugated women in the society that exemplifies a strong feminist intervention. Elements of nature, like the blood red moon, the shriek of an owl, the dense jungle, the gloomy atmosphere, and the ancient Kali temple, and the quivering karsh flowers surrounding it, not only serve as the mute witness of the heinous crimes committed to Bulbul, but also accompany her throughout her monstrous reincarnation, which is perceived to be the manifestation of goddess Kali, the goddess of destruction and revenge itself, and thus her bedroom transforms from the site of violation into the seat of divinity. Change the slide. This supernatural resurrection of a bulbul into what Barbara Frietz calls as monstrous feminine deconstructs the stereotypical representation of women in Asian folklore as abhorrent, ominous, and terrifying figures, and has an emancipatory effect, enfranchising women to rewrite their own history of vigor and empowerment, unblemished by patriarchal intervention. But such powerful transformation of Bulbul into a strong, resolute, and aggressive personality leads to her being suspected. Okay, respected as a witch that needs to be slain in order to restore patriarchal order and normalcy. Even Satya, who has now become a man of patriarchal disposition, finds her transformation as inappropriate and devious and accuses her of adultery. Wounded by Satya and frustrated with the hypocrisies of patriarchal world, Bulbul ultimately sacrifices her life in witch hunting amidst the lap of Mother Nature that is equally exploited and destructive for its utilitarian values. At the end of the movie, Bulbul's metaphorical burning in the wildfire and her spiritual rebirth to take the final revenge on her husband bears resemblance with Earth's cyclical nature that continuously reproduces new life from the remains of its own destruction. Come to the conclusion. To conclude with, it becomes totally justified to declare this movie as a haunting reminder of how the concept of gender plays prominent role behind the practice of witch hunting, through which men assert their dominance over women. But the true accomplishment of the movie relies on its experimentation with a witch figure who is at the same time monstrous and monstrously wronged. At the final segment of the movie, we find Bulbul in a completely different avatar, her twisted feet, long open hair, minimal dressing, and unadorned body becomes symbolic of her renewed identity, which is not at all restricted by the patriarchal standards of ethics, morality, and behavior. At the same time, the uncanny resemblance of her appearance with both the goddess Kali and the witch enables her to transcend the rigid binaries of good and the evil, the angelic and the demonic, and the divine and the monstrous. Thus, through portraying the female protagonist as a fusion of the devil and the devil, who is a true manifestation of the monstrous feminine, the movie successfully decolonizes the regressive and one-dimensional portrayal of female monstrosity in indigenous folklore and critiques the malicious practice of witch that promotes gender-based violence against vulnerable women. Thank you.
Now, our third reader, paper reader, Soumya Tiwari.
7 मिनट का टाइम दे तुम्हारा 7 मिनट उसके बाद लंच का है
Good afternoon, respected chair and fellow scholars and dignitaries. I am Soumya Tiwari from the University of Allahabad. I am presenting on my topic Borders Belonging to Broken Homes, Trauma of Territorial Division in Indian Folk Narratives. Today I will be discussing how Indian folk song serves an alternative archive of territorial trauma, preserving emotional truth about land disposition that often remain absent from the official historic records. My paper examines folk tradition from Bengal and the Bhojpuri-speaking regions, exploring how these oral narratives encode the pain of displacement, the loss of home, and the fragmentation of communal life. Land in the Indian context is never merely an economic resource or territorial marker. In folk literature, it functions deeply affective space where memory, identity, and belongings are rooted. While official archives document displacement through statistical compensation schemes and resettlement policies, focusing on quantifiable data, folk archive preserve and I call affective data and grief, longing, and fractured belonging that accompany the territorial loss. This creates what we might call an invisible archive, one that exists in songs, in performances, in communal memory, rather than the written documentary. My central argument is that folk songs constitute an alternative archive of territorial trauma. They preserve experience that remain largely absent from the state-centered historiography. Now I present an excerpt from a song, Nadi, Nadi Bahi Jai, Amar Desh Chhoti Jai. This line is from Bhattiyali song, The river flows on and my homeland slips away. Captures something that no policy document can express. The river becomes both literal and symbolic, an agent of separation that carries away not just bodies, but memory, attachment, and a sense of rootedness. Through such metaphors, folk tradition transform individual grief into shared cultural memory, allowing community to narrate disposition of their own terms. My study focuses on two prominent folk traditions that vividly dramatize the trauma of separation from the land and home. First, the Bhattiyali songs from the Bengal. These are sung by the boatmen and the riverine communities. They express a sense of perpetual drift and longing, where river become metaphor for exile and distance. The very name Bhattiyali comes from Bhatta, meaning low tide, the downstream journey away from home. Second, Videsiya, songs from Bhojpuri speaking people.
These emerged from histories of male migration to colonial city and plantation. They foreground women voices and mount abandoned homes, empty courtyards, and the slow erosion of rural life. The term Videsya itself means one who has gone to the foreign land. Now, these traditions reveal how land is positioned not such singular historical event, but a continuing emotional condition embedded in cultural expression. These Bhatiyali songs are performed by the Majhi and the Malla communities, the boatmen of the Bengal Delta. They are characterized by long drawn high pitched notes that echo across the river. Traditionally, solo performance of these songs expresses profound solitude and existential longing. The boatman sings to pass time during long journeys, but the content reveals deep emotional truth and displacement. There are some notable performances like Abbasuddin, who brought this tradition to urban audiences, Saurav Moni, Malai Kamli, who continued the legacy, the Himangu Bishwas, who connected folk tradition to the broader social movement. Um, then for the Videsya, this Videsya tradition was basically founded by Bhikhari Thakur, who lived from 1887 to 1971 and is often called the Shakespeare of Bhojpuri. He was himself a migrant laborer who worked in the jute mill of Calcutta, and his experience deeply informed the artistic work. His songs and folk dramas addresses colonial era labor migration, but also tackle social issues like dowry, caste discrimination, gender inequality. What's particularly striking is how Videsya foregrounds women perspective, giving voices to those who are left behind. The tradition continues through the artists like Mahendra Misir, Jat Shankar Yadav, and contemporary performers like Kalpana Patauri, who has adopted these themes to address post-colonial migration and development. So there are a few more quotes who I want to say. Pia Dare Calcutta Suni Anganwa Mo, meaning my beloved has gone to Calcutta, my courtyard lies empty. The Videsya collapses domestic space and emotional abandonment into a single image. The empty courtyard represents not just physical emptiness, but the collapse of an entire way of life. The second quote, छूट गई मिट्टी माई, छूट गई अपना गांव. I have lost Mother Earth, I have lost my village. Here, land is personified as a maternal presence. It loss experienced as a form of orphanhood. This is not merely a property loss, it's existential deprivation. These songs transfer private suffering to collective testimony. Through repetition and communal performance, they create what scholars call mnemonic community, groups bound together by the shared memory of loss. There are some similar traditions across India, like in Punjab we have where we see the songs of separation that took new meaning after partition. In Rajasthan we have Purjan song named after the cranes that migrate seasonally, metaphorically carrying message between the separate lovers in the family. In Kerala we have Pattu Pattu, the little song emerged from the girls' migration, breaking the dialogue between the migrating wives back home. Uh, Now I'm talking about some theoretical frameworks, and my analysis draws to three key theoretical frameworks. The first is the cultural trauma theory. Following J.P. Alexander, I approach trauma not as an individual psychological phenomena, but as a collective cultural process. Communities make sense of catastrophic loss through symbolic forms in these uh, performances. Second, memory studies. John Asman's work examine how oral tradition function as mnemonic system. Third, subaltern discourse. Following Ranjit Guha and Gayatri Spivak, I read these songs as historical testimony that gives voices to the experiences marginalized within elite and the state-funded historiography. Now, to conclude, folk songs transform territorial loss into the legible emotional narrative. Though metaphors are empty courtyard, boiling soil, birds, and the distant river, they make visible the lived experience disposition. At this historical moment marked by the accelerated development, climate-induced migration, and the renewed struggle over land rights, these oral traditions insist on remembering what modernity seeks to forget. They preserve the memory of lost lands and homes as a testament to survive, endurance, and the persistence of belonging despite displacement. Thank you, and I want to thank you, the Aligarh Muslim University, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the last paper present reader of this session, Jaina Falma. Jaina, you have only 7 minutes.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Anna Fatima. I am a PhD research scholar from SRM Muknagar campus, Ghaziabad. Today I am here to present my research paper on the topic of caste, class, and folk literature, an analysis of Mudra Jan's portrayal of Indian society. There are basic themes. There are basic themes of my paper: caste, class, and folk literature. First of all, we discuss folk literature. Folk literature includes folk songs, folk tales. These are created by ordinary people and reflect their daily life. It gives voice to poor, marginalized people and helps their tradition and values. And now we are discuss the system of caste and class. Caste is a hierarchy system. Caste is a hierarchy system in India. If I belong to a SC category, so I cannot be priest, saints. Even I cannot listen to holy scripture. Uh, and class is also related with caste. Caste is a rigid system in India. Caste is decided by birth, and the class decided by caste. Caste decides our occupation also in Indian society. If people belong to a high caste, they have business. And the other hand, if people belong to a lower caste, Dalit communities, they forced to do a hard and unclean work, uh, they face exploitation in everywhere. Role of caste and class in literature. There are significant role caste class in literature. There are many Indian writers, social reformer, explore caste and class system in their works to bring a revolution in society. Mukherjee was one of the great writers who raises the issue of caste and class in his novels. Untouchable is one of the best novels. In this novel, Mukherjee explore the concept of untouchability. Uh, uh, Untouchable explore how caste and class system makes people polluted. Mukherjee portray the theme of caste and class through his character Bakha. How can be Bakha polluted and untouchable? While he is best example of purity and honesty, and the other hand, Pandit Kali Nath had a higher position in society because he belonged to a Brahmin category while he harassed people. After the overall analysis, the real untouchable and polluted should be Pandit Kali Nath. In Indian context, caste and class and folk literature are deeply interconnected and reflect the social reality. Caste in India traditionally determines a person's status, occupation, way of life, while class refers to a economic position based on wealth. How caste and class in folk literature are deeply connected. Folk literature gives voice to common people through the folk expression. Exploited people express their emotions, struggle, and suffering. In Indian context, they also act as a form of protest because of folk tradition. People can ask questions about injustice through satire, songs, and storytelling. In conclusion, Mukraj Anand's portrayal of Indian society present a powerful and realistic picture of the interconnected realities of caste, class, and folk life through his novels, especially Untouchable. Anand exposes the harsh inequalities deeply rooted in the Indian social structure. He highlights how the caste system dehumanizes individuals and restricts opportunities.
Now, I'd like to request Dr. Javed Alam from Department of Hindi, Aligarh Muslim University.
शुक्रिया मैम। सबसे पहले तो मैं खुशकिस्मती है हमारी, मैं माध्यम सानिध्य में बैठा है। मुझे बहुत ही समझ लीजिए हम लोगों को हर चीज गाइड करना, हर चीज की तरफ से देखने और दिखाने का तरीका क्या हो सकता है वो सब नहीं हम लोगों को बताया। उनके सामने बोलना मेरे लिए बहुत मतलब जो है घबराहट हो रही है। लेकिन मैं जो भी कुछ बातें हैं मैं कुछ बातें उसको जल्दी में रखने की कोशिश करूँगा वक्त को देखते हुए। दूसरी बात यह है कि मैं सेमिनार के डायरेक्टर डॉक्टर तारिक पठान साहब का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ कि उन्होंने अवसर दिया मैं अपनी बात पूछ सकता हूँ। मेरा विषय है, सुबह में हम लोगों ने सब बिस्मिल्लाह सब कुछ सुना हम लोगों ने, उसमें उन्होंने कहा कि जो है कंपाइलेशन तो बहुत हुआ है, ये जो लोक साहित्य का जो है विश्लेषण कैसे किया जाए और फिर उसकी जो है उसका मूल्यांकन कैसे किया जाए, उसको कैसे देखा जाए, समझा जाए, उसके मर्म तक कैसे पहुंचा जाए। मैं उसके ही इस विश्लेषण लोक साहित्य के, लोक गीतों के, लोक जीवन के, उनके विश्लेषण में क्या चुनौतियां आती हैं, मैं इस पर ही बात करना चाहता हूँ कि क्या चैलेंजेस हैं लोक जीवन को, लोक साहित्य को, लोक नाट्य को, राजनीति को समझने। सबसे पहले तो मैं ये समझा कि ये जो लोक शब्द है इतना ज्यादा बहुप्रचलित शब्द है, ये इतना ज्यादा बहुप्रयुक्त शब्द है कि इसका आप एक अर्थ आप करने जाएंगे तो फिर दूसरा अर्थ आपके सामने निकल कर आ जाएगा। जैसे लोक के अर्थ में हम देखें तो देखा जाए तो सामान्यतः योग के अर्थ में जाना जाता है। शब्दावली की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, पारिभाषिकी की मैं नहीं जा रहा हूँ। लोग कभी कभी जन सामान्य के अर्थ में आता है, कभी जन साधारण के अर्थ में आता है, कभी साधारण जन के अर्थ में लिया जाता है, कभी मानस जन मानस के अर्थ में लिया जाता है। इस तरह से ऐसे शब्द ऐसे लिया जाता है। लेकिन जब यही शब्द जो है, जब हम इसको इस्तेमाल करते हैं, जब इस शब्द को उपसर्ग के रूप में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, यानी प्रीफिक्स के रूप में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, साहित्य के साथ, जीवन के साथ, साहित्य का लोक साहित्य हो जाता है, जीवन में लोक जीवन, लोक आचरण, लोक धर्म, लोक चिंता, ठीक है, लोक मर्यादा, लोक नीति, तब हमारे सामने जो है उसके अर्थ और उसके कई गवाक्ष खुलने लगते हैं और फिर वही अर्थ नहीं रह जाता है जो हम लोग के अर्थ में, जन सामान्य के अर्थ में इस्तेमाल करते हैं। जरा से इसको और थोड़ा सा ध्यान दें, इसको थोड़ा सा एक्सप्लेन करना चाहूंगा मैं इस बात को। और जब कोई अर्थ करता है तो हमें देखने की जरूरत होती है कि वो कौन लोग हैं जो अर्थ कर रहे हैं, इस लोक का अर्थ कौन कर रहा है। ज्यादा चुनौती बड़ी बात ये है कि लोक जो है जिस अर्थ में आप इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, छोटा सा मैं एग्जांपल दूंगा। हिंदी साहित्य का विद्यार्थी हूँ तो हिंदी साहित्य से ही कुछ छोटा सा एग्जांपल जो आपको समझ में भी बात आ जाए। आचार्य रामचंद्र शुक्ल ने लोक धर्म की व्याख्या की, लोक जीवन के बारे में, लोक मर्यादा, लोक नीति के बारे में जब उन्होंने बात की तो उन्होंने शास्त्र के नजरिए से लोक को देखा। मतलब शास्त्रीय पद्धति से, शास्त्र पांडित्य परंपरा के हिसाब से लोक अगर नहीं है तो वो अपढ़ है, अशिक्षित है, बेकार है, मतलब इस तरह से। लेकिन जो है अब उसी के बरक्स जो है, और जब बात करते हैं लोक की तो जनता, जन सामान्य, जब उसी हिंदी साहित्य के इतिहास में जब वो लोक की बात कर रहे हैं, लोक मानस पे प्रभाव पड़ा, जन सामान्य की बात, लोग कहते हैं जन सामान्य की बात है। लेकिन जैसे ही हम कोई बात जो अशिक्षित या कुछ ऐसी शास्त्रीय परंपरा से हटकर, शास्त्र चिंताओं से हटकर कोई बात करते हैं तो कहते हैं कि तो अशिक्षित लोगों की बात। यानी लोक में भी आप जो है अंतर करने लगते हैं कि कौन लोग है, ये हमें देखने की बात। शिक्षित वाला लोग है, अशिक्षित वाला लोग। इसके साथ जब इसी के बरक्स जो है, जब हम आचार्य हजारी प्रसाद द्विवेदी को देखते हैं तो बिल्कुल उल्टा देखते हैं। वो हिंदी साहित्य उद्भव और विकास में और अपनी भूमिका में इस तरह से अपनी बात उन्होंने बहुत एक्सप्लेन करके कही है। एक जगह उन्होंने कहा है कि मैं शास्त्र के नजरिए से लोक को नहीं, मैं लोक के नजरिए से शास्त्र को देखना चाहता हूँ। यानी शास्त्र को हम शास्त्र को हम ऐसे वर्ग जो अशिक्षित जन है, ये अशिक्षित जन, अपढ़ है, जो जानता नहीं है, निरक्षर है, जो सभ्य नहीं है, शिष्ट नहीं है, ऐसा जन, इसके नजरिए से हम शास्त्र को देखेंगे तो हमको शास्त्र और लोक एकदम बिल्कुल आपस में मुखामुखम करते हुए दिखाई देंगे। सर जो है इस तरह से हमको समझने की जरूरत है कि चुनौतियां कहाँ पे है। अब इसको एक्सप्लेन कैसे, अब इस लोक को जब इतना ज्यादा एक कैसे समझा जाए, शास्त्र का सुनो बात हो रही थी, उसका कोई रूप नहीं है, लोक का बेनाम है। अगर बेनाम है, उसका कोई रूप नहीं है, तो हमारे पास उसका कोई वर्गीय चरित्र भी नहीं है, कोई क्लास के हिसाब से आप उसको एक्सप्लेन भी नहीं कर पाते। कोई आप उसका जो है कोई एक जो है देश बनाकर आप उस पर बात नहीं कर, कोई शास्त्रीय परंपरा नहीं है उसका, कोई एक ऐसी परंपरा, पांडित्य की परंपरा भी नहीं है कि चलो भाई शास्त्र के हिसाब से एक्सप्लेन कर लो। लोग इतना बहुप्रचलित है, बहुविध बहुपरिवर्तित है कि आप बदल एक जगह जाएंगे, दूसरे जगह दूसरे रूप में दिखेगा। ऐसे अव्यवस्थित जैसे जैसे सारी चीजों को देखते हुए, तो क्या ऐसे ऐसी लोक की व्याख्या कैसे की जाए? क्या ऐसी जो है, और हम उसका महिमा मंडन भी करने लगते हैं, सब उसका अच्छा है। लोक जीवन कितना सप्राण है, जीवन वाला है, वो कितना स्त्री विरोधी है, कितना वो दलित विरोधी है, कितना आदिवासी विरोधी है, कितना मर्दवादी है, ये कौन बताएगा? इस लोक जीवन को कैसे समझा जाए? तो हमें हमारे सामने जो है ये चुनौतियां एक हमें निकल कर आती है। फिर इसकी समस्या का हल कैसे निकाला जाए, इसका कैसे रास्ता निकाला जाए, कैसे इसको समझा कैसे जाए, इस व्याख्या को कैसे किया जाए, इस लोक को समझने की। अगर लोक धर्म यही है तो जनमानस मानता चला रहा, तो जनता में तो हर तरह की बातें हैं। तो इस लोक धर्म को अगर मानते रहेंगे तो हम लोग, मैनेजर पांडे ने कहा कि जो है, और कबीर दास का हवाला देते हुए उन्होंने कहा कि अगर इस तरह के लोक मानस को आप मानेंगे तो आप लोक भ्रम में पड़ जाएंगे। ये लोक धर्म नहीं है, लोक धर्म में पड़ेंगे और ये अपधर्म होगा, ये जनमानस का नहीं है। हमें तय करना पड़ेगा कि क्या हमें जो है इस लोक की व्याख्या, चुनौती, कैसे इसको समझा जाए। तो इसको समझने के लिए हमें कुछ ऐसी बातें हैं जो देखने की, क्या अगर इतना अव्यवस्थित रूप है, इतनी जितनी अनिश्चितता है इसके साथ, तो क्या हम इसको महत्वहीन करार देते? क्या इसको समझा ही, क्या बेकार मान लिया जाए? क्या उसको ऐसे ऐसे ही जाने दिया जाए? तो हम महत्वहीन नहीं है। हमें अपने उस महत्वहीन, जिसको हम समझ रहे हैं कि इसका कोई अपना चरित्र नहीं है, अपना कोई स्वरूप नहीं है, उसको समझने के लिए हमें पद्धति डेवलप करनी पड़ेगी, ताकि हम एक निश्चित अर्थ तक पहुंच पाए, मर्म तक पहुंच पाए, उसका विश्लेषण कर पाए। इस निश्चित अर्थ को समझने के लिए हमें ये देखना पड़ेगा, हमें सबसे पहला काम तो ये करना पड़ेगा कि हम जो है ये देखें कि वो आलोचनात्मक कितना, उसमें सजग आलोचनात्मक विवेक है कि नहीं, उस लोक धर्म, उस लोक जीवन, उस लोक साहित्य, उस लोक नाट्य जो है हमारे जीवन को क्या वो पीछे लेके जा रहा है कि आगे लेके जा रहा है? जैसे गीत गा रहे हैं तो उसको लोक जीवन मान लिया जाए। इस तरह से जो है हमें सबसे पहला काम तो ये होगा कि हमें अपने उसके जो सामाजिक सांस्कृतिक अध्ययन करें, तो हम अपना जो है उसके आलोचनात्मक विवेक का प्रयोग करें। ठीक है, मैं समझ रहा हूँ सर, को देख लिया। तो दूसरी बात यह है कि उसके अंतर विरोधों को हम देखें। जब सजग आलोचनात्मक होकर देखेंगे तो हम देखेंगे कि उसका अंतर विरोध कहाँ का। उस अंतर विरोधों को देखते हुए हम ये देखें कि क्या जो है वो जनपक्षधर है कि जो है उस शोषण करने वालों के साथ है, जो एक्सप्लॉइट हो रहे हैं उनके साथ है, या जो एक्सप्लॉइट कर रहा है उनके साथ है। इस तरह की चीजों को आप देखते हुए अगर हम चले तो ठीक रहेगा। और सबसे बड़ी चीज ये है कि हम ये तलाश करें कि जो है इन सारे दो बातों को लेकर उसमें लोक जीवन का जो प्राण तत्व है, जो हमें जीवन का संदेश देता है, जीवित रहने का ताकत देता है, वो कहाँ मौजूद है। इसके साथ मैं अपनी बात समाप्त कर रहा हूँ। मैं अपनी बात रखता हूँ। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आप लोगों ने सुना।
Thank you, sir. Okay. I would like to request our teacher, Dr. present her valuable comments.
Thank you very much. First of all, I congratulate Dr. Tariq Pathan for organizing this seminar on socio-cultural aspect of Indian folk literature. I am also thankful to Dr. Tariq Pathan sir and his team for inviting me to chair the session. Respected chair of the session, dignitaries on the rise, dear scholars and dear students. being a co-chair, my responsibility is to comment the paper which have been there by the four scholars. We, along with the four scholars who have presented their paper, we have two resource persons. Adiba Fayyaz is there, Dr. Uh, Javed is there. Dr. Adiba basically has pointed out the narratives of the folk literature and how the journey of the folk literature have come before us. She has also tried to pointed out that actually the folk literature is the mirror of our traditional society. This is the basic ideas, and she has given significant contribution to the folk literature that enable us to understand what has actually happened in the past, what was our culture, what was our tradition, what the custom we follows at the time, and that has really immense values today, and it has a lot of research, right, insights therein if we engage in it. Then we have Dr. Javed has very beautifully explained the approach what we need right now in the pop literature. He tried to define the pop literature, what we mean by pop literature. What is the need of our present time that what we do in the pop literature? Simply, if we narrate any old or oral theories, or we talk about any customs, right, in the form of songs or in drama, then what we consider them as the folk literature, or there's a need to have any particular specific, right, comments on them. There's a need to analyze those things. His purpose is that there should be lot of work is needed. This area is having a lot of scope for doing the research. This was the few observation which was pointed out by Dr. Javid. Now we have the four papers. First paper was presented by Aparna Sanvilia from the University of Aligarh. She has right presented his paper on the topic exploring the role of women in Bodo caste literature. And it is related to it, and she has tried to again narrate the things that where from our folk literature has arrived before us. What was the that if we talk about the woman, what she has presented over here is that what was the position of women at the time of the voodoo movement or voodoo, what were their traditions, customs, these all the things, right, which are having the immense part in it. And she has also pointed out the indigenous approach, culture, society, myths, which were followed at the time. The paper was also very much significant from its own perspective. Then we have the second paper was presented by D.P. Piryadas. His title was Importance of Folk Literature, which is gender-based inequality, and she has tried to point it out the criminalization approach which has emerged due to our myths, beliefs, right? What she has pointed out, the suspected curates, how what has happened to how the inhumanity has arrived before us, that we have so much belief on our traditional values that needs to be taken care about. Basically, in her paper, what is the important thing is that we have to values not only we have to also values our culture, but there is a one concern is that we need not have to only value our traditional customs, but we have to relate with the modern things with and it should be a scientific in nature, and if that a scientific approach may be there, then we may be able to avoid some kind of criminalization, as she has pointed out that 1,500 women has lost their life due to the suspect activities with them. So this also depends that what has actually happened at the time. Then the third paper was presented by Soumya Tiwari from University of Allahabad. His title was Information Technology in Indian Folk Literature. and she has also given him, her title was Trauma of Folk Narratives, right? And she has also tried to point out that what is the importance of the oral literature over there, how the literature has come forward from the traditional approach and what the songs, play, drama, etc. And what we have right now, and what is the need of going through all the literature which has emerged and from which our society has gone through. Finally, the last paper was also very much interesting. That was presented by General Zainab Fatma. Her topic was caste, class, and folk literature, and he has tried to establish the relationship between what was the caste system was there, how the different class of society is there, and finally how it is associated with the folk literature. And overall, the final conclusion was made by Dr. Javed, and what he has said that how we define the folk literature, whether we only relate it to the old stories, songs, customs, or norms, etc. But there's a need to think over it. This is as Dr. Adiba has pointed out that there's a need, today we are living in the era of the globalization. We have digitalized ourselves, and we have the immense opportunities. If we want to work easily, we may get the ideas from different sources. That I again thank Dr. Tahir Pathan for giving me an opportunity to say a few words and to co-chair the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. Now, I would like to request Professor Ajay Bisaria, sir, for valuable comments. Please, sir.
मंच पर उपस्थित कैसर आलम साहब, जावेद आलम साहब और अदीबा फैयाज, यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं, जरगा साहब और वो सभी लोग जिन्होंने यहाँ पर अपना पेपर पढ़ा और बाकी दोस्तों, समय तो जो अलॉटेड था इसके लिए वो अब खत्म होने में 1.5-2 मिनट, लेकिन 10 मिनट देर से शुरू हुआ था, इसलिए मैं मानता हूँ कि 2:30 बजे तक का समय तो अपने पास है। मैं कोशिश करूंगा उससे पहले अपनी बात कहूं। और बात क्या कहनी है, वैसे हम बात कर ही रहे हैं लगातार। सबसे पहले तो मैं बधाई देना चाहता हूँ ताहिर पठान साहब को इस बात के लिए कि इन्होंने सेमिनार आयोजित किया। सेमिनार तो बहुत सारे होते रहते हैं, ये बहुत अच्छे ढंग से ऐसे किए कि जिन लोगों को इन्होंने मौका दिया है अपनी बात कहने के लिए, खासतौर से नौजवानों को बिल्कुल, और वो उनका कंसर्न हमारे सामने जो आया है, अभी मैंने 4 पेपर सुने, बहुत बढ़िया ढंग से उनका प्रेजेंटेशन भी बहुत अच्छा था और कंटेंट भी बहुत अच्छा था। तो लगता है कि अब मतलब इन चीजों को लेकर के सीरियसली विचार किया जा रहा है, हम तक पहुंच रहा है, ये ज्यादा जरूरी चीज है। आकर के बहुत बड़े बड़े वक्ताओं को बुला करके हम उनका ढेर लगा करके बुलवा दें, उसका कोई बहुत फायदा नहीं है जब तक कि चीजें नीचे तक जाती नहीं है, वो लोग अपनी बात नहीं कह पाते। यहीं से मैं रिलेट करूंगा, जो फोक लिटरेचर है, इसको हम लोक साहित्य कहते हैं। बहुत अच्छी बात तो पहले अदीबा फैयाज ने कह दी, आपको बेसिक चीजें बता दी कि ओरल ट्रेडिशन है, और ओरल ट्रेडिशन होने की वजह से उसमें लगातार परिष्कार होता चल रहा है अपने तरीके से। तो रिटेलिंग 3 ही फॉर्म में मिलते हैं, ड्रामा, फोक टेल्स और सॉन्ग्स। ये 3 तरीके हैं इसके। आपको वो टेल्स बहुत तरीके की हो सकती है आगे, उसमें दंत कथाएं भी आती हैं, फेबल्स भी आती हैं, फेरी टेल्स भी आती हैं, वगैरह वगैरह। आज से 4000 साल पहले तक विश्व में लिखने का प्रचलन नहीं था, लेकिन उस वक्त तक भी साहित्य मौजूद था। और ये जो साहित्य की परंपरा थी, यही इसे ही हम लोर्स, फोकलोर्स, और हिंदी में हम इसको लोक साहित्य कहते हैं। 4000 ईसा पूर्व से 3000 ईसा पूर्व के बीच में ये लिखना शुरू हुआ, और हमारे पास सबसे पुरानी जो कथा मौजूद है, जो दुनिया के बहुत सारे हिस्सों में अलग अलग ढंग से फैली, वो सुमेरिया की गिलगमेश की कथा है। गिलगमेश का नाम आपने सुना होगा। फर्स्ट स्टोरी जो हमको मिलती है वो भी बहुत लिखी हुई बहुत नहीं मिलती, ईंटों पर उसको कुछ लिखा गया है और वो भी अभी पूरी नहीं मिलती है। उस कथा को आगे और पूरा कर लिया गया। इन कथाओं ने जो सुमेरिया में शुरू हुई, उन्होंने दुनिया के तमाम खित्तों में किया और वो कहीं जाकर के वो नूह की कहानी के तौर पर, हिंदुस्तान में मनु की कहानी के तौर पर ये बेबीलोनिया की प्रलय कथा है मूल रूप से, जो सारे उसमें है। तो दुनिया भर में फोक लिटरेचर जिसे हम कहते हैं, ये चीजें जब ज्ञान अपने आरंभिक अवस्था में है, जो अनुभव साझा करना है उनको, वो अनुभव साझा कर रहे हैं, जहां भी जा रहे हैं वहां पर भी साझा करना है। जाहिर है कि आप जानते हैं कि जो सॉन्ग्स हैं, फोक सॉन्ग्स हैं या फोकलोर्स हैं, फोक टेल्स हैं या ड्रामा है, ये सामूहिक समाज की एक चीज है जहाँ सामूहिकता बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी। दिन भर आपके पास काम के लिए था और उसके बाद एक लंबी सी शाम थी जो आज खत्म हो चुकी है। शाम अब होती नहीं, सीधे आप रात में जाते हैं, ये फर्क होता है। लंबी सी शाम थी, नींद आने तक के बीच का अलाव जला करके लोग बैठे हैं, या और तरीके से अलाव तो हमारे जलता था, यहाँ सर्दी भी होती थी, गर्मी, लोग इकट्ठे बैठ रहे हैं। हमारे यहाँ उसका फॉर्म चौपाल था, वहां पर ये कहानियां कही जा रही है, ये गीत सुनाए जा रहे हैं, ये परंपरा हमको मिलती है। जब लिखना शुरू हो गया उसके साथ ये वही समय है जब वर्चस्व भी कुछ लोगों का होना शुरू हो गया पूरे समाज के ऊपर। इस वर्चस्व ने अपनी सुरक्षा के लिए शास्त्रों का निर्माण किया। जिस सवाल को ये उठा रहे थे, थोड़ा आगे जाकर के उसमें परेशान होने की कोशिश कर रहे थे जावेद साहब। शास्त्र तब बनने शुरू, शास्त्र लोक से ही बने, लेकिन जीवन तो निरंतर परिवर्तित है। शास्त्र हो जाता है फिक्स, वो फिक्स हो जाता है और फिर उसके हिसाब से बाकी सारे लोगों को जिनकी जिंदगी में परिवर्तन भी आ रहे हैं उसको कोशिश की जाती है कि उसी तरीके से जिए। ये जो एक कंट्रास्ट पूरा पैदा हो रहा है, उसमें लोग जो बहुतायत में है, वो तमाम लोग, उनकी अपनी व्यथा कथा इस रूप में हमें फूटती हुई दिखाई देती है। इसमें उनका जोश भी है, इसमें उनका प्रेम भी है, और इसमें लेकिन मूलतः उनके भीतर की वो वेदना है कि उनको समझा नहीं जा रहा या चीजों को गलत तरीके से उनके ऊपर लागू किया जा रहा है। इसीलिए आप चाहे इनसाइक्लोपीडिया ब्रिटानिया का देखें या कहीं भी देखें, तो लोग की बात करते हुए कहा जाता है दिस इज इन कंट्रास्ट विद द प्रिंटेड लिटरेचर। ऐसा कोई फॉर्मुलेशन पूरा है नहीं कि कंट्रास्ट ही हो हमेशा। बहुत सारी चीजें हमें मिलती हैं जो आगे शास्त्र भेद है, और इसीलिए जो वेदना उपज रही है वो इसी बात के लिए उपज रही है कि वो नॉर्म्स उनके ऊपर लागू किए जा रहे हैं। दो बहुत खूबसूरत पर्चे यहाँ पर, बहुत सुंदर पर्चे पढ़े जो फेमिनिस्ट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से उनको दिया गया था। ये भी मैं आपको कह दूं कि वो जो आपने बोडो कथा की और उसके बाद एक और वो थी ये भी बहुत पुरानी चीज है। जो हमें शुरू के काव्य ग्रीक परंपरा के मिलते हैं, उसमें भी जो है ये भाई बहन के रिश्ते की बात, और ऋग्वेद में भी यम और यमी का संवाद ये इसमें मौजूद है। पहले से एक डिबेट है, सोसाइटी चेंज हो रही है और औरत का सब्जुगेशन शुरू हो रहा है। धीरे धीरे से ये जो हमारी लोक परंपराएं थी, इनको प्रिंट में तब्दील करने की कोशिश की गई किया लोगों ने। आप जानते हैं कि जो ओडिपस हो या होमर का जो काव्य है, वो कंपाइलेशन ही है उस समय की जो लोक परंपराएं थी उनका। ठीक इसी तरीके से भारत का भी जो पहला ग्रंथ हमारे पास मौजूद है साहित्य के तौर पर, वैदिक ग्रंथ है हमारे पास, उसके बाद काव्य के तौर पर हमारा पहला ग्रंथ रामायण। ये रामायण, राम की कथा वाल्मीकि ने पहली बार नहीं कही है। रामायण खुद इस बात को कहता है। वो पहले से राम कथाएं मौजूद हैं, उसके बहुत सारे वर्जन चलते रहे होंगे। उनको उस सत्ता के लिए अनुकूल बनाने के लिए वाल्मीकि का बाकायदा चयन किया जाता है कि वो उस कथा को कहें। और वाल्मीकि क्या करते हैं? वाल्मीकि जब कथा को कहते हैं तो उसे लोक गायन की शैली में कहते हैं। राम कथा का जो विस्तार, वाल्मीकि की राम कथा का जो विस्तार है वो लवकुश की तरफ से होता है, और लवकुश गाने में बहुत निपुण है, उनको गाने के लिए दिया जाता है। ये लगता है हमें कि हमारे देश में यहाँ हम फोक को प्रिंट में या मतलब शास्त्र में बदलने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, एंड दैट इज महाभारत, जिसका पुराना नाम देखा है, अनेक कथाएं जिनको लेकर के आप बात करते हैं। लेकिन ये जब इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज करते हैं रिलीजन के नाम पर, तो वो चीजें आगे जाकर के इस गतिशील समाज को परेशान करती है। उनके लिए तो कोई परेशानी नहीं, जो वर्चस्व वाला वर्ग है उसके पास वो सारी सुविधाएं, वो चीजों को ऑब्जर्व कर सकता है, लेकिन नीचे का वर्ग उसकी वजह से परेशान होता है। वो वेदना हमें लोक साहित्य में दिखाई देती है, चाहे अब हम उसकी स्टडी करें, फेमिनिज्म के नाम पर करें या इको फेमिनिज्म के नाम पर करें या दलितवाद के नाम पर करें, जो भी करें उसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन अब हम कर रहे हैं। लेकिन ये दरअसल उनकी वो पीड़ा है जो चेंजिंग सोसाइटी हो, जहां शास्त्र उसको दबाने की कोशिश कर रहा है, वहां हमें वो स्वर दिखाई देते हैं। लेकिन ये अकेले नहीं है, यहाँ एक सावधानी की जरूरत है। यहाँ वो भी है कि उस पूरी जनता के बीच में उन चीजों को, दिमागों को, पूरा जो हमारे सभ्यता का इतिहास है वो चंद लोगों द्वारा ज्यादा व्यापक समूह के दिमाग को कॉलोनी बना लेने का इतिहास, कॉलोनी बना दी, दिमाग को कॉलोनी बना दिया, वो विचार पूरे हैं। जैसे आज की तारीख में भी मतलब करवा चौथ का व्रत रखना एक औरत को बहुत जरूरी लगता है। क्यों? कि उसके शौहर की उम्र बनी रहेगी। क्यों? सवाल यहाँ पर था क्यों होगी, लेकिन इस क्यों को नहीं पूछते, वो तो करना है। हम कितने भी आगे बढ़ गए लेकिन हमको ये तो करना है, ये तो ऑब्जर्व करना है। क्यों? क्योंकि हमारे दिमाग में बात बैठा दी। ये एक मसला नहीं है। प्रेमचंद के साहित्य तक हम आप देखते हैं अगर, तो हमें दिखाई देता है कि दलित कहता है कि हमारा हमने तो भगवान ने ऐसा पैदा किया है। अभी भगवान ने पैदा किया है क्या है, ये दिमाग को कॉलोनी बनाया है ना उन लोगों ने, कि तुम्हें इसी पोजीशन में यहीं पर रहना है, औरत को इस तरीके से ही रहना है, वो भी रहना है। इस व्यापक जनता में बहुत सारे लोग ऐसे जो उन विचारों से मुक्त नहीं हो रहे, पीड़ा ही अपने दिखा रहे हैं, लेकिन उनसे ग्रस्त भी है। इसलिए तमाम फोक लिटरेचर जो है वो प्रतिरोध की बात नहीं करता हर जगह। बहुत सारा ऐसा है जो उन चीजों को जस्टिफाई करने के लिए भी करता है। तो लिटरेचर की इन दोनों धाराओं को, फोक लिटरेचर में, फोक सॉन्ग्स में हमें इन दोनों धाराओं को देखने की जरूरत होती है। मैंने जो समय कहा था हो गया, बात तो करने का बहुत मन है।
थैंक यू सर, आपको सुनना ही बहुत बड़ी बात है सर। इट वाज फुल ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन एंड नॉलेज। जावेद सर की उधर हम लोगों को शायद पता चल ही गया होगा कि सर के पास बैठना और उनकी बातें सुनना। Now I would like to request Mohini, the PhD scholar of Marathi Section, please come here for a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much sir, thank you so much ma'am for being here. और स्टूडेंट के लिए यहाँ पे खाना दिया जाएगा। पेपर रीडर्स के लिए गेस्ट हाउस नंबर 2।
सभी इस सत्र के अध्यक्ष आदरणीय विसारिया साहब, रिसोर्स पर्सन, को चेयर, पेपर रीडर, सभी का दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ। जो जिसे इनवाइट किया गया है उनका लंच का इंतजाम गेस्ट हाउस 1 पे किया गया है, और जो स्टूडेंट पार्टिसिपेंट है उनका इंतजाम यही किया गया है, तो यही रुकिए, यही आपको खाना दिया जाएगा। और उसके बाद का सेशन लगभग 3:10 पे शार्प स्टार्ट किया जाएगा। तो जो स्टूडेंट है उनका लंच का इंतजाम यही किया है, आप यही रुकिए, यही आपको 5 मिनट में आपको दिया जाएगा। और जो गेस्ट है 3:10 पर स्टार्ट किया जाएगा, यही स्टार्ट करें।
चलिए सर, मुझे भाई आप हमारे यही रुकिए, आपका भी